The city was a magnificent sprawling metropolis, its skyline dominated by towering glass buildings that reached toward the sky like gleaming sentinels. It was a city known for its ambition, its wealth, and its bustling life. Yet today, it was a place of panic, a place where every street, every corner, was filled with terror. The cause of this unprecedented fear was a creature of unimaginable size and hunger, a villainous, gluttonous fat pig who had come out of nowhere, its insatiable appetite tearing through the city. This pig was no ordinary creature. It was enormous, far larger than any building in the city, with a body that stretched as wide as a street and as long as a block. Its skin was a grotesque shade of pink, stretched tight over bulging rolls of fat, each one trembling with every insidious movement it made. Its mouth, wide and cavernous, opened to reveal a set of glistening, tusked teeth, yellowed and jagged. It snorted and squealed with cruel joy, gobbling up anything in its path, cars, trees, buildings, anything that came within its reach. Its greed seemed endless, as if it were trying to consume the entire city in one ravenous bite. The screams of the people echoed through the streets as they fled in every direction, trying to escape the monster's wrath. Cars were overturned and crushed beneath its bloated body, windows shattered as buildings were reduced to rubble. The creature's hunger was relentless, and as it devoured the city, it only grew larger, its form expanding like a grotesque balloon. Its hunger was beyond anything natural, and no one knew how to stop it. Amidst the destruction, there was one hope. One figure, towering above the city, moving through the streets with the grace of a goddess. She was a superhero, a giantess of incomparable beauty and strength. Standing at over 50 feet tall, her body was an embodiment of power, sculpted with muscles and defined with every inch of her form. She had long, flowing golden hair that shimmered in the sunlight like a halo. Her eyes were an intense, radiant blue, filled with a calm determination that inspired hope in those who saw her. She was a protector, a savior, a force of nature. With every step she took, the ground shook beneath her, but the destruction around her halted. People who had been stranded or caught in the chaos were quickly scooped up in her massive, powerful hands. She moved with purpose, rescuing one person after another, her giant feet firm on the ground as she glided through the wreckage. Her hands were like soft, gentle cradles as she lifted families and individuals out of harm's way. Though her size was monstrous, her movements were graceful, precise, and tender, ensuring that everyone she rescued felt safe within her embrace. Yet, despite her extraordinary abilities, the superhero woman had her limits. Her hands and feet were already full with the people she had saved. She had barely any space left for the many others who were still trapped, waiting for someone to come and rescue them. The chaos was growing. The villainous pig was drawing nearer, its destructive path unstoppable, and there was only so much room for anyone to be saved. High above the city, at the very top of one of the tallest skyscrapers, a tiny man sat frozen in terror. He could see the devastation below, the monstrous creature rampaging through the streets, growing ever closer to his building. The man was trapped, alone, and his heart raced as he looked out over the city. He had no way of escaping. The building stairwells were blocked by debris, the elevators long since disabled by the chaos below. His only hope was the superhero woman, but even she, with all her strength, couldn't possibly reach him in time. She had already been rescuing people for what seemed like hours, and the thought that she would be able to carry him out as well felt impossible. His mind raced. Would he be able to make it out? He felt a lump form in his throat as despair washed over him. The city seemed to be crumbling beneath him, and he couldn't escape its fate. The superhero woman was too busy. She wouldn't have enough hands to save him. He would die, trapped, with no one to help him, consumed by the chaos and the gluttonous monster below. But then, as if summoned by his very thoughts, a massive shadow blocked out the sun. The tiny man looked up, his breath catching in his throat as the gigantic form of the superhero woman descended toward him, her powerful body effortlessly cutting through the air. She landed gently on the rooftop, her feet making a soft thud against the surface as the wind from her arrival swept over him. She had arrived, but her hands and feet were already occupied, holding other rescued people. Her voice, deep and soothing, echoed through the air, a comforting presence amidst the horror. "I've got you," she said, her words warm and reassuring. "But I need you to trust me. Climb inside my mouth. I'll take you to safety." The tiny man's heart skipped a beat. He could hardly believe it. Did she really expect him to climb inside her mouth? The thought was surreal, almost impossible to fathom. The superhero woman's mouth was enormous, an expanse of soft, pink flesh that seemed far too vast for any normal human to navigate. But there was no time for hesitation. The villainous pig was coming closer, its snorting growing louder, and the skyscraper they were on wasn't going to hold much longer under the creature's destructive path. With his heart pounding, the tiny man stepped toward the edge of the roof. He looked up at the giantess, her eyes filled with warmth and certainty. There was no time for fear. This was his only chance. Taking a deep breath, he began to climb her immense body, scaling the smooth curve of her massive arm until he reached her mouth. Her lips were parted slightly, a soft and inviting gap through which he could see the interior of her mouth, a warm, moist cavern, glistening with saliva. It felt surreal to stand there, to know that he was about to step inside the very mouth of a giant woman, but there was no other choice. He moved toward the edge of her lips, his tiny form dwarfed by the enormity of her face. The superhero woman's voice rumbled from above, her tone gentle yet firm. "Come on, little one. I'll keep you safe." With one last glance at the devastation below, the tiny man took a leap of faith. He climbed onto the tip of her enormous tongue, feeling it shift slightly beneath him, its surface smooth and slick with moisture. Her saliva, thick and warm, coated his body, and the texture was unlike anything he had ever felt before. It was soft, wet, like being wrapped in a blanket of comfort, a sensation that was surprisingly soothing despite the circumstances. Inside her mouth, the world felt vast and enveloping. The warm air, tinged with the faint scent of sweetness, made him feel strangely safe. The walls of her mouth were curved, her teeth looming like towering cliffs above him, yet there was no danger. It was as though the superhero woman had created an impenetrable sanctuary, a protective space where he was cradled in her warm embrace. Her tongue, smooth and soft, held him gently, making him feel as though he were being cared for rather than swallowed. The tiny man couldn't help but feel a wave of gratitude wash over him as he lay there, his body pressed against the soft, moist surface of her tongue. The superhero woman's pulse echoed through her body, and with each beat, the tiny man felt more at peace, as if wrapped in the safety of her immense strength. It was an odd comfort, knowing that he was completely dependent on her, but in that moment, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. As the superhero woman soared through the air, the wind whipping around them, the man felt the rush of movement, the giantess's power carrying them faster and faster toward the ground. He closed his eyes, feeling the gentle undulation of her tongue as she flew. The noise of the city and the destruction below faded, replaced by the soft, rhythmic hum of her flight. In those moments, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. Despite the chaos, despite the horror, he was safe. And it was all thanks to her. Eventually, the superhero woman landed gently on the ground, her feet touching down with a soft thud that reverberated through the earth. She lowered her head, and the man, still nestled on her tongue, felt the world tilt as she carefully opened her mouth, allowing him to climb out. He stepped onto solid ground, his legs trembling with relief and gratitude. Looking up at her towering form, the tiny man felt his emotions rise. He had been saved from certain death, not by a machine, not by a weapon, but by this incredible, beautiful, and powerful woman. His voice shook with emotion as he looked up at her, his words coming out in a breathless whisper. "Thank you," he said, his voice full of awe. "I don't know what I would have done without you. You saved me. I'll never be able to repay you." The superhero woman smiled down at him, her expression warm and reassuring. "You don't need to repay me," she said, her voice full of kindness. "You're safe now, and that's all that matters." With a final glance up at the towering woman who had saved him from certain death, the tiny man knew that he would never forget this moment. She had given him more than just a chance at survival. She had given him hope when all seemed lost, and for that, he would be forever grateful.